Welcome to a very special edition of The Piano Men with Stanley Carr. Happy New Year, everyone! It's our first show of 2019, and tonight we'll be discussing the music of the Beatles that feature a piano accompaniment. Joining me live right now on this magical mystery tour are three immensely talented musicians from the Nashville area. They are the first and so far only Beatles tribute band to have been nominated for a Grammy Award. Woo-hoo. Please welcome to the show the WannaBeatles.
Yay! Thank you, Stanley. So good to be here.
Yeah. All right. Good to have you guys. Happy New Year, lads.
Thank you. And to you
Stanley.
too.
Great to be here.
All right. So let's kind of get things started. Let's tell the listeners a little bit about how the band got started.
Well, back in the old days, no, the story is that we were musicians that knew each other. We were playing just regular non-Beatle gigs, and then we got a gig at a Mexican restaurant playing just songs from the American Songbook. And one day we just decided, hey, let's play some Beatles songs because we all love the Beatles. And the audience responded to it, so we said, let's play some more. And we started playing more, and then we started rehearsing. And we went to the manager of the club and said, how about doing a Beatles night here? And he said, sí, Beatles and fajitas. So usually gets a big laugh.
It was a Mexican restaurant.
Beatles and fajitas.
Yeah.
I love
and
it.
that's where, from humble beginnings, that's where we started.
So how long have you guys known each other?
Well, this is Brian speaking, and I started working with Dennis in the early 90s, when it may have even been 89 or 90, but it was when I first moved to Nashville, and Dennis had just moved here in the 80s.
Yep.
And we worked together in this non-Beatles specific, regular band playing lots of private parties. And it was what I wanted to say to comment on how this connects to a keyboard show is that when we started the WannaBeatles, we kind of got inspired by playing Beatles songs, but we knew because of what it could be done on a keyboard in 2007, that couldn't have been done in 1970, that it made it possible to play I Am the Walrus and Strawberry Fields and all these amazing songs that couldn't have been done on a piano. It just, the way a keyboard works nowadays, it really gives you the whole orchestra, and that allowed us to play so many complicated Beatles songs that had never been played live by a lot of people. So that's a very interesting connection of how keyboards really matter to playing Beatles songs when you consider their entire output.
Especially in the hands of a master like Nathan Burbine.
Oh, indeed.
Now, we really do concentrate on parts that are being produced through the keyboard, even though in the original records they were usually strings or horns. It's a pretty amazing instrument.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't want to say that it belongs on a Piano Man show because it's not really a piano. It's more of a electronic keyboard, but it's still it includes the piano, and a lot of piano players are very capable of that kind of musical contribution.
So when you first got together, what were your initial goals when you formed?
To do the WannaBeatles, even before we had a name, it really was just having fun, playing the songs, remembering them, and the fact that we could do things like Strawberry Fields Forever because of the keyboard that allowed us to be orchestrated.
And we were just having a blast. I mean, it's music we grew up to, and it makes you feel good just playing it. So.
Absolutely. Do any of you have a favorite Beatles song in particular?
We've been asked that and had to think about it through the years of being the WannaBeatles. And I've had different songs come up and different Beatles come up as favorites. But I remember there was a real strong period where Drive My Car was a favorite for me in those early years. And it really captures a lot of the energy of the Beatles playing as a rock band.
And ironically, the song that I probably gravitate to the most is from Revolver. It's called Here, There, and Everywhere. It's a gorgeous ballad. And we don't play enough of it, and maybe that should be our New Year's resolution.
Yep. It's interesting. I always loved Yesterday. If people ask me what song, if you could have written one of the Beatles songs, that's the song I would have loved to have written. But I love Revolution, especially the up-tempo version of Revolution. That song just rocks my socks off.
Oh, no doubt. So the four of you, and of course David, unfortunately, can't be here. I know he's not feeling well. We just want to give a special shout out to him, as well as George Adams, who does Geo on the radio. I hope both of you get better soon, and we hope you can come back in and visit with us anytime. But the four of you started, and I know initially you had a different keyboard player at the time. So Nathan, that brings me to you. How did you get involved with music, and how did you, what made you want to join the WannaBeatles?
It was a long and winding road. It's a stormy night and all that. I like to tell the guys, oh, you guys were just practicing, getting ready for me to join. But I'm just kidding. No, actually, I grew up as a classically trained musician, but I always wanted to be in a rock and roll band in the back of my head. But I thought, oh, man, I'm hitting 50. That's never going to happen. But then David, who's a friend of mine, David the drummer in the WannaBeatles, said, hey, Nate, we're losing our keyboard player. Would you have any interest in auditioning? And I did, and it's been wonderful. I joined the band in 2010. Been
Oh, wow.
18, almost 19 years now.
Yeah.
And we've
Yeah.
never been the same since then.
9 years. 90? No, 9.
You guys are a
Math
family.
wasn't his strong suit.
You guys are a
We're
family.
like
That's
just
great.
any dysfunctional family.
Of course, bickering, arguing, loving each other. That's what it's
Yes.
all about, right?
Yeah.
It's not quite the same without David.
There's a lot more bickering.
So back to you, Nathan. At what age, how old were you when you first started learning piano?
I started taking piano lessons when I was 7 and continued that until I was 16. And then I switched to pipe organ.
Oh, wow.
And so I still make a part of my income playing the organ. So classical roots all the way.
And Nathan is also the type of musician who plays with theatrical productions in the pit orchestra.
yeah.
He'll arrange
Musical
and
theater.
sometimes compose stuff. And were you trained for that? I was curious if you.
No, but when I was in 7th grade, the community theater group needed a piano player. So I started playing when I was 12 years old. And
Was it a musical?
yeah. Yep.
Well, he's been doing it a lot in Nashville. Playing at the drama department at the high school where
Yep.
he works, and that's where David met him.
Yep.
Oh,
And so,
okay.
and it's actually been very handy for the WannaBeatles. I mean, don't you think there's?
Oh, yeah.
It's like Nathan, as the keyboard player, has kind of enhanced our theatrical aspirations or potential or whatever you want to call it. And really, when you get down to it, the Beatles were theatrical in their own way. But I think the background of playing a score and playing the parts that help people sing is really a great role for a musician in a band.
That
Absolutely.
brings this up, and Stanley, I don't know if you want to go there yet, but when the Beatles first started, they relied on a classical piano player to help them flesh out a lot of their arrangements.
Martin.
George Martin, who
Yep.
was really the 5th Beatle. I almost called him the 5th WannaBeatle. But, he played the piano solos in 3 of their early songs. A Hard Day's Night, he and George played that dum da 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 dum along with George, and that was George Martin playing that on the piano. He did the same thing with Good Day Sunshine. That piano solo in the middle of that is George Martin. And there are many others that he played on.
Is it Rocky Raccoon?
You know what? I'm not sure who played that solo.
Okay.
That could have been him. We'll have to look that up.
In my life.
In My Life,
that's
that
the
was
same.
George Martin. Yeah. And the beautiful song on their last album, the Abbey Road album, the song Because, that's George Martin playing
Harpsichord.
that. Mm-hmm.
We'll be playing we'll try to fit in all these songs as much as we can throughout the hour. So before we kind of segue into what Nathan was referring to, who else were you influenced by as musicians other than the Beatles?
Boy, that's a great question. This is Brian speaking. I'm kind of like the horn player. And I grew up with an understanding that Louis Armstrong started this whole thing called jazz. And my father grew up in the swing era and loved Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw and all these and big bands. And so I kind of was raised with that. And I really enjoyed swing music when I was a young horn player before the Beatles came out. And when the Beatles came out, I really related to it. And I had brothers who were musicians, and we were just learning how to sing those songs and the harmony and learn, it was a great extra layer. But I had a lot of jazz and swing in my background.
This is Dennis, and I was a showbiz brat. I was a child actor growing up, so I was very immersed in musical theater and loved it. And that took all the way until the Beatles came out, and I had a older brother who had learned to play guitar, and he started his own band, and I would listen from afar to these songs that they were doing. His first band had an accordion player playing Beatles songs and all those early '60s songs. And then eventually, because I think they had lost somebody in the band, and they knew I could sing, although God only knows what I sounded like as a young, pre-adolescent fellow. But my older brother let me be in his band called the Eminons, which is no name spelt backwards.
Oh, wow.
That's
And
funny.
It was probably around the era of the Monkees, and I had myself a Mike Nesmith hat that I would wear.
Any
and-
pictures?
Yeah, there's some pictures floating around somewhere.
Any recordings?
Oh, no, we weren't recording. We,
It was different back then.
yeah.
Yeah, you have to take his word for it.
Yeah, no
Well,
social
nobody was
media,
writing
no
songs.
cameras.
Yeah.
Well, I take it back. My brother was writing songs, but that happened when he got to college, I think. So when he had the band, that really there wasn't original songs. So we were Beatles all the way, and all the
Yeah.
other groups, Loving Spoonful, and all those folks out there.
By the way, I just looked it up in my encyclopedia here, and George Martin did play that honky-tonk solo in Rocky Raccoon.
Interesting. All right.
Bad for a classical guy.
So we're going to go play Good Day Sunshine, and when we come back, we will hear from Nathan with an anecdote about Good Day Sunshine. And we're back here, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined by the WannaBeatles on tonight's show.
3 out of 4.
3 out of 4.
Ain't bad.
So, Nathan, tell us a little bit about Good Day Sunshine. Give us a little background.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about the Beatles is that they would often hear something, and that would spur them on to write a song. And in the case of Good Day Sunshine, the Lovin' Spoonful had a big hit called Daydream, which was out in the spring of 1967. No, not 67, 66. And Paul heard it, and he said, "Oh, I want to write an old-timey vaudevillian song like that." And so he came up with Good Day Sunshine.
Oh, man, that's great. So let's talk a little bit more about George Martin, who you talked about earlier. What were his biggest contributions to the Beatles?
Well, the first thing was he gave them a shot.
Yeah.
The Beatles had been rejected by all these other record placers, including Decca, which you can still hear their audition tapes from Decca. But George Martin said, the sound wasn't really what I was excited about. It was the camaraderie. It was the personality of these guys that he loved so much. And so he gave them a shot, and they recorded their first single. What was that?
Love Me Do.
Love Me Do.
Yeah.
Which they substituted somebody to play for Ringo, right?
Oh, that's right. Andy White, I think,
That session.
ended up playing the drums. And Ringo, I think, played a tambourine in the background.
That was the second version of the song.
Oh, okay.
Which you can hear on the anthology.
But anyway, so George Martin gave them that shot. And then he said, okay, guys, I think I'm going to try to find a number one hit for you. And he went searching through the archives and found that song, How Do You Do What You Do to Me? And the Beatles recorded it, but their heart wasn't in it. And they said, George, we can't go back to Liverpool with that song. I don't know why they felt that way. I think it's a great song. Yeah. But anyway, he said, okay, well, what can you come up with? And that's when they came in with Please Please Me. So George was like a mentor to them. He spurred them on. Early on, he used to help them come up with intros to their songs and ways to get out of the songs.
And helped them with harmony.
Yep.
There are a lot of pictures of him at the piano and them gathered around. It didn't take long for them to learn what they needed to know.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So big influence.
Okay, so the next song that we're gonna play in a second, Because.
Oh, yes.
So you have a story about that one as well.
Absolutely. So that's another song where they heard a song and it inspired them to write another song. So John, this is later on in the Beatles' career, and John is with Yoko, and he's laying on the couch, and she's playing the Moonlight Sonata. Is this piano turned on, Stanley, so I can play it?
It should be.
Okay, so she was playing this. I'll just play a little more. And John said to Yoko, play it backwards. Well, I don't know how successful she was at playing it backwards. But anyway, that was the catalyst for John to end up writing this. And we know that as Because.
Very interesting.
Now, there's another interesting thing about that song. George Martin is the one who actually played the harpsichord on it. So there's George Martin back in there as that fifth Beatle.
He basically was probably the heart and almost like the heart and soul of that entire group.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. The Beatles were still the creative element, coming up with the songs, coming up with the lyrics. He just helped them to flesh it out.
As far as like the production goes.
Yes, absolutely.
I probably shouldn't say heart and soul, but maybe more like the backbone
Perhaps.
of the group.
Yeah. Especially in the early years.
Yes.
You know, he was absolutely the backbone for the first album, and then from that point, an essential voice.
So we're going to go ahead. I'm just removing all these aux cables here, folks. Bear with me here for just a moment.
Stanley is quite an audio engineer here, folks. You should see him.
So we're going to go ahead and play Because, and we will be right back with more WannaBeatles on Beatles Piano Night. All right, we're back here with the WannaBeatles. This is the Piano Men with Stanley Carr. And Nathan, I believe you wanted to say something about the song you just heard?
Yeah, there's another interesting thing when you get to Abbey Road, which is where that song was, and that is that they did a lot of experimentation with the Moog, or is it Moog, synthesizer.
The Moog.
And so that was George Harrison on there experimenting and playing that Moog synthesizer stuff.
They were in the Moog.
They were in the Moog.
The Beatles basically did a lot of experimenting.
You know what? They say that they spent so much time just trying to come up with different sounds. In the early days, they might be, they were just two guitars, a bass guitar, and drums. And so one of the early things they would do to get a different sound is just simply add some piano onto it. Or add, some electronic keyboard, which they were still in their infancy, some of those things.
They tried different things. They threw stuff at the wall and saw what stuck,
Yeah.
That's right.
No, they literally threw things at the wall.
Yeah, both figuratively and literally.
So, like, one of the things I know they did to get different sounds is they would slow the tape down and play, for instance, some of those George Martin piano solos we talked about. He would play them at half speed so that when you put it into regular speed, it sounded different. It sounded brighter. Like, I know that when he and George did that solo on A Hard Day's Night, they did it at half speed. Is that something we can play? 2, 3, 4. And so that when it got put into the regular speed, it sounded like an electric piano. Or some people said a little quasi-harpsichordish.
And the 12-string guitar was played an octave lower and came out at half the speed.
And it was more crisp.
Yeah.
That's right.
But, so George played it very slow, and then the record sounds like he was playing very fast. He wasn't playing that fast.
But you have to play that fast.
But I have to play that fast, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like they were creative at a lot of different things, and they really paved the way for all these different groups. I mean, I believe they even listened to a lot of music from around the world. They didn't just do rock and roll. I know I was watching that documentary that I did on you guys several years ago, how David was talking about how they listened to a lot of Latin music and Indian music.
Yes.
Oobla Dee Oobla Da was one. And,
Very
I
Caribbean.
believe they auditioned, I think, with Besame Mucho
Yes.
for
That's
EMI.
true. Yeah.
Besame mucho.
Besame Mucho.
See.
So they basically were well-rounded with a lot of different genres.
Yes, and had been listening to songs for so long. That Motown was a big influence. Buddy Holly,
Yeah.
Chuck Berry, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot
Definitely.
of other kinds, jazzy things, obscure R&B, and old. Paul especially was familiar with pop music from the 30s and the 40s. Because his father had been a musician, and he heard a lot of it growing up.
And, of course, vaudeville, as you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do this. Why don't we have you guys play something on the show?
All right.
Would you like it to be a Beatles song or a non-Beatles song?
Well, it could be a Beatles song or a WannaBeatles song.
Aha. Well, Jess, let's give them a little taste of In 63.
Okay.
So this is an original
Yeah,
WannaBeatles song written by Dennis Scott, who's sitting here.
Hello. I will do my best to remember my song.
Now, we don't have the drums, which is what gives it pop.
And
Tell
we
you
don't
what-
have a fourth
tell you what I'll
voice
do.
either.
All right. How about that? The WannaBeatles.
75% of the WannaBeatles.
All right. So,
The number to call in New York is Bigelow 3.
so what makes the WannaBeatles stand out? You guys have been together since 2007. Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, 12. Oh gosh, yeah.
Time flies.
Something like that.
You've been together all this time. What makes the WannaBeatles stand out from other Beatles cover bands?
Well, for one thing, we're having a blast.
Yeah,
We really are having fun. When we go on the road, we are silly. And I think it comes across to our audiences. At least people have told me so, that they can tell we're enjoying it. And
I
who
can tell,
wouldn't
too.
enjoy playing the Beatles repertoire? It is so fun.
And so diverse. When you take the 6 years of recording, it really covers a lot of range.
Mhm. Totally.
From really simple and accessible to really complex and sophisticated. It's all there. And we attempt to cover it all.
And
That's the joke.
and when we play in certain situations when the audience goes crazy and we understand that a lot of that is because they're reliving memories and enjoying the music, but we are the vessel by which that happens, and it makes us feel good, and we feel great that we're able to keep that music going.
It's been a great time to be a Beatles tribute band because there's all these 50th anniversaries that keep happening. So we're now in 2019. We'll have the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road.
And then what do? Start all over again?
Then we can start having the 51st anniversaries and all that. Yeah.
And the unique thing about the WannaBeatles, as you said earlier, about how the keyboard works and all that, you do a lot of experimenting yourselves with instruments. You make the guitar sound like strings. You use the keyboard for different things as well. That says a lot about how you present yourselves. And
yeah. And it's not just the keyboard. Yeah, as you mentioned, Dennis has a MIDI guitar, so it can sound like a guitar, but at the same time, it has access to all these other sounds.
yes.
Yeah, and I think the part of the reason that's happened is because we decided a long time ago that we didn't want to have more people than 4. We liked the number 4 because the Beatles had 4 people, and we thought, well, can we do it? Can we tackle all these orchestrated songs and things that have more parts than we have hands on our arms? But somehow between all of it, with Brian playing different horns, he picks up one horn, he puts it down, he picks up another horn, and people love watching that too. It's like a 3-ring circus.
It is, yeah.
And for those of you, when we say horn, we're talking flute, recorder, cornet, clarinet, various saxophones.
Yeah.
And now the mandolin,
Yep.
Wow.
which was never on a Beatles song, right?
That's so fascinating.
We were in Bristol, Tennessee, the birthplace of country music,
Mm-hmm.
and we wanted to do something special for them. So we took a Beatles song and we gave it a bluegrass feel. And Brian, I don't know which came first, the song or the mandolin, but he picked up the mandolin and he
Dennis said, "Yep, okay, it's in the show. Here we go."
yeah, and now it's become a staple.
Yeah.
But it's pretty exciting too to have. Well, there's certain songs where you need 2 or 3 horns playing, and so we have a real horn. That's me on the cornet. Then we have a very authentic section like Nathan playing the "Got to Get You Into My Life," and then Dennis activates a MIDI horn on his guitar. So we've got a very full horn section.
Yeah.
You know, with the reality of one guy actually using the wind through a horn, it really comes. We're kind of proud of that. How much of an orchestrated sound we can get from the three people up front.
Yep.
And actually, David, while he's playing drums, also plays keyboards
Mhm.
and triggers sample sound effects and stuff like that. I mean, everybody is holding down several jobs.
Oh yeah, definitely. So let's go ahead and transition here. We're gonna play the song "In My Life." Give us a little background on "In My Life."
All right, so In My Life is one of their earlier songs. I think it's 1965. It's one of Paul's... I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong song. In My Life, 1965. Oh, yeah, so this is one of the songs that George Martin played the solo in the middle. And you can tell his classical background because it is a Baroque-style piano solo. And what I read about it is that the Beatles couldn't decide what was going to happen in the solo. And when they went and took a break, George Martin slowed the tape down and put this Baroque solo in. And when they came back and heard it, they said, yeah, we love it. And that's how that ended up in there.
Oh man, that's a great story. So we're gonna go ahead as I'm changing chords again. We're gonna go ahead and play "In My Life." And can you tell me what album "In My Life" is from?
Rubber Soul?
Rubber Soul. All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and play this, and we will be right back. And we're back with the WannaBeatles here on Beatles Piano Night. So lads, tell me a little bit about your albums. You have 2 albums out, is that correct? Or 3?
3 if you want to
Count the EP.
The EP, that's right.
That would be
Old
2
school,
and a
new
half.
school. Yeah. But you have 2 full-length albums out. One of them's a spoken word album, the other's a recorded album. Let's talk about your spoken word album. How long did it take you to record that album?
Oh my. Well, it's got a collection of interviews with people who are Beatles fans, telling their own stories of either encountering the Beatles or trying to get to meet them, and just fantastic. Some are touching, heartwarming stories, and some are just funny. Like the woman who went to the Beatles hotel after they had left with a jar, and she wanted to collect the air that the Beatles had breathed. So she took the jar. She talked her way into the room past a chambermaid, and she took the jar and she swung it up in the air and capped it up, and so she had a jar of Beatle air.
Oh, man.
That's
you can't-
devotion right there.
Exactly. Yeah. But so there are lots of stories, and it took a while because I'm sure we have at least 40 or maybe even 50 people that we interviewed, and so to assemble it and then to edit it together was really a labor of love.
No doubt about that. So you got the album. How surprised were you when you received that letter saying, "Congratulations, you've been nominated for a Grammy Award"?
That was very exciting.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Well, I was I was home, and my wife has taken it upon herself when they announced the Grammy Awards to go online and check it out, because usually I'm still sleeping. They announce it early. And she said, "You're nominated." I said, "Come on, I'm trying to sleep here," and so it really was. I didn't really think it was going to happen. I mean, the odds are so incredible. There are so many nominations and so many good things out there.
Because you were competing against quite a few people. That was 2012, is that right?
That's right.
Yes.
2012. Wow. So you were at that ceremony where you were almost going to meet one of your idols.
Yes.
Betty?
No,
No.
before Betty. Sir Paul.
Oh, that's right.
We knew Paul was going to be at the Grammys because they were they honoring him that year?
Well, they announced that he was going to be performing.
That was it. Yes.
He had written that new song, not My Valentine, but Valentine.
I think so.
And he performed it with a small
Jazz
orchestra.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with Diana Krall. And
You-
Joe Walsh. She had some great musicians. Okay.
And we thought this is our chance to finally meet Paul.
Mhm.
We even had little
You had a video too.
buttons made up
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
we want to meet Paul. We wrote a song called "We Want to Meet Paul," hoping that if it got a lot of plays on YouTube, maybe Paul would see it or hear it, and he'd want to meet us. But Neither thing happened.
I must have been hungry that night. I thought it was I Want a Meatball.
That was quite the campaign as well. You were up against the Mark of Zorro soundtrack, the Hamlet soundtrack, Tina Fey, and Betty White, who eventually won. But how close were you to actually meeting Sir Paul McCartney?
300 yards.
We were in the Staples Center, kind of a balcony seat, and he was on stage. So, a few hundred yards maybe.
And a security detail.
Yeah. There were quite a few people between us.
But we were breathing the same air.
There you
Took out
go.
a jar.
We didn't need the jar, yeah.
Have there been any open lines, since then to finally meet Sir Paul
We have a
McCartney?
new policy now. If he wants to meet us, he's going to have to come after us. That's it. He had his chance.
Well, see, we still like to perform We Want to Meet Paul. And if we ever meet him, we won't be able to perform the song anymore. So it's to our best interest we don't meet him.
It's also in our best interest so that he stays in good health.
Yes.
That's true too.
Yeah.
I wouldn't rule out meeting him myself, but I would think that would be a great item to add to your list of things to do for the future. You never know. One day you recording another album, nominated, and second chance.
It could happen.
It could very well happen. So let's transition here. We're gonna go ahead and play Lady Madonna, if you wouldn't mind, Nathan and Dennis and Brian talking about the history behind Lady Madonna.
Oh, well, this is another one of those songs where there was a previous song that influenced them, that caused them to want to write this song. In this case, it was Paul. And the song is from 1956. I don't know if it was a hit here in the States, but it was played on the radio in England. And the name of the song is, and here I'm losing the...
Bad Penny Blues.
The Bad Penny Blues. And anyway, if you look that up on YouTube, the Bad Penny Blues, by a guy named Humphrey Littleton, and Littleton is spelled L-Y, not I. Littleton. If you look that up and listen to it, the very first opening bars of that song, you'll say, "Oh my gosh, that's where Paul got it, where he got this." I mean, it sounds very, very similar to that.
Yeah.
What we can do is we'll play Lady Madonna, and then when we come back, we can hear your piano skills. We can hear the differences between the two songs, but we're going to go ahead and we'll play Lady Madonna, and we'll be right back after this. And we're back. That was Lady Madonna. And instead of Nathan playing, we're going to actually play you just a little bit of Bad Penny Blues so you can hear kind of the similarities between the two songs.
Yeah.
It is. There's Lady Madonna.
And just one of the examples of a song that was inspired by one of the Beatles, one of the four men,
Hearing something, and then wanting to do it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like Helter Skelter. Do you remember that story? The Who had just had a song out, and they were bragging that it's the dirtiest, it's the nastiest, it's the loudest song ever. And Paul said, "Oh," and he took that as a challenge, and then they came up with Helter Skelter.
Oh man.
Was it I Can See for Miles? Is that the one that he was thinking of?
I'm not sure. I gotta look that up. Sorry.
Okay. Well, Helter Skelter really is a dirty song.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. So, what was the relationship like between Paul McCartney and John Lennon as songwriters? Did they get along? Did they have disagreements?
Well, Paul talks about that they were competitive, but friendly competitors. When John wrote Strawberry Fields, that was about John's childhood, and Paul heard that, "Oh, that's lovely, isn't it? Well, maybe I should write something." And he wrote Penny Lane. So they did complement each other, and there was a sort of a friendly rivalry.
There was a competition to see who would get the A side of a single. So like one example of that is John really wanted the fast version of Revolution to be the A side instead of, I think it was Hey Jude. And Hey Jude won out in that case.
Wow.
Yeah, it really is a deep question about the Beatles, about the relationship between John and Paul as songwriters, but they really were just so into it. I'd love to hear more of their early songs that the 100 songs that they wrote before we ever got to hear anything, because they were just absorbing so many influences, and they were both very heavily into a lot of American popular music, Elvis and Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers, and you can hear that, and then a lot of other stuff. But what's interesting is that we kind of can identify Paul McCartney as one style or one side of the equation, and John is the other. But if you really look at the work, you can see that they were both very capable of changing places.
Right.
Like Helter Skelter being an example of Paul sounding a lot like John, just being really raw and primitive and earthy. And then a great example of John going way out of what we think of his usual stuff. Well, on the White Album, this Julia, but also Good Night.
Oh,
that closes the whole album, doesn't it?
That's
And
John.
It's a lovely, sweet, tender song, and John wrote it. And it's one of the sweetest Beatles songs ever. And it just shows how far over John could go from that genre that he was sort of more comfortable in. I mean, they both were extremely versatile, and sometimes Paul would be helping John with lyrics. And a lot of times John was, able to help guide Paul with lyrics when they were listening. But they both were capable of so much that they could write plenty on their own. But the real beautiful story is how much they entered into each other's consciousness in order to create this massive catalog that couldn't have been done by any one person or any two people.
That's right. Paul has said that the two of them would get together to have a writing session, and they never came away without having finished a song.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some people get into the doldrums. He said they never did.
Yeah.
And he said they usually would be 2 to 3 hours, and they'd come away with a song. That reminds me of Paul telling the story. Probably everybody listening already knows the story. John and Paul writing "She Loves You" in Paul's house, and Paul's father was in the living room. And when they finished it, they came out and sang it. "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." And Paul's father saying something to the effect of, "Well, there's so many American colloquialisms. Couldn't you say yes, yes, yes?"
That's great. That's just funny. So they've written about almost 200 songs together.
I think it's more than that. I think it's 300 and something that the two of them wrote together.
Oh, man.
Now, the Beatles themselves recorded something like 219 songs. So there were a bunch of songs that didn't get recorded.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Paul is heard saying that there are a few songs that he can still remember, and there's a little bit of intrigue about maybe we should put this out. But he said, no, they're really not very good.
So we're going to transition here. We got about 10 minutes. We're going to play Get Back, and we'll talk a little bit about that because we have to mention, too, Billy Preston was a very, very, very important player in their later years.
That's right.
Because he wrote and played on, I believe it was Abbey Road, and the last album, Let It Be, too. I think he was involved in those sessions as well.
Right.
What can you tell me about Billy Preston?
Sure. So actually, the whole Let It Be album was recorded before the Abbey Road album, even though it was released after. But anyway, they were in a very difficult time. There was a bit of not getting along, and it was George Harrison who specifically brought in Billy Preston to try to help the dynamic. And they said as soon as somebody else got in the room, suddenly everything was going well again.
Yeah.
They behaved.
It was really as much for psychological reasons as musical. But Billy Preston was quite a musician, and they had actually known him years before in Hamburg. I think they had crossed paths with Billy Preston as a very young musician was there with Little Richard.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he had quite a track record, and they got along great. And he really created a very distinctive sound on that Get Back solo.
It really is a hip sound that he brought.
It jumps, yeah.
And he later worked with George Harrison on his solo stuff as well, too.
Yeah, he can be seen on the Bangladesh video, that concert
yes.
George did later. A lot of Here Comes the Sun.
Yeah.
And Billy Preston really, really shines.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So on Get Back, Billy Preston, I think, is playing a Fender Rhodes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and play Get Back, and then when we come back, we'll hear a little bit more from the WannaBeatles before we say goodnight this evening. Here's Get Back. All right, that was Get Back, one of their last hits from the Let It Be album. All right, the WannaBeatles. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on tonight. It really means a lot.
Stanley.
Where can you, to tell everybody listening, where can they find out more about the band?
Go to www.thewannabeatles.com and make sure you have the in front of WannaBeatles. Otherwise, it takes you to Norway.
And if you're driving and trying to light your lighter, please wait until you pull over on the side of the road and then pull out your cell phone and set it on the cigarette lighter.
You guys on iTunes as well, Spotify.
Oh, yes.
CD baby, that's right. We sure are.
We're everywhere.
Yeah,
We're
Apple Music.
ubiquitous.
Yes. Spotify.
All right. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Beatles Piano Night.
Yay.
This is Stanley Carr. You can check us out on... Oh, you guys are on Facebook, too. Social
sure.
media.
Yes.
All our faces.
So they're on social media
Just
as
seen a
well.
face.
So you can
Been on Facebook.
catch us next week